Okay, so welcome to the fourth Evolving Man podcast. Really happy to have you here today. Today is going to be slightly different. Today, Rod here. Good afternoon, Rod.
Hello.
He's going to be interviewing me about my book, which has just come out yesterday on Amazon. And the book is about how to survive and thrive in challenging times. And so I'm going to be, in a moment, passing it over to Rod. First of all, just wanted to introduce a bit the idea with these podcasts is over the coming months. I'm going to be interviewing people, especially men, just to do with men's work and how we as men at these times can, have tools, practices, and teachings which can help us through these times, to help us to step up, really. So that's the intention. So good afternoon, Rod. Please, I pass it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Piers. It's good to be with you again.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I know you have a background in healing work, but for the listeners or the viewers who may not know much about your background, shall we start with a little bit of information about you and how you've moved through your life into the healing of men's issues, emotional woundings that you're working with right now?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, it's where I begin, but essentially in the 90s, I went to business school, international business school, France, London. And then I was working in London when I graduated, and I got into self-development work. It was 97. I'd split up from my partner, and my sister lent me some books, and that was the beginning of my journey, really, that I started to get interested. But what I didn't realize is I had a lot of emotional wounding from childhood. And so this was 1997 that I got interested. And but I kept drinking, kept taking drugs. I was pretty unskillful. And it kind of took, when I was in 2000, I had a breakdown. And within a few weeks, really, I'd find out my father had cancer, terminal cancer. I'd left my partner, left my home, so I was basically homeless. And, and I was just kind of sofa surfing. And it was around that time that I was like, okay, I've got a problem here, but I didn't know who to speak to. And that's really, 97, that's when the journey really began. And it's taken me, to the extremes, really. It's taken me 2000. So I started helping my father out, who was living in Isle of Wight at the time. And I tried to help other people. I thought that was a way that I could find happiness, by helping others. 2001, after my father died, I went to Africa. I went to work as a volunteer coordinator there in Ghana. Again, I was about giving to others, but I was still broken. I was still drinking, taking drugs. I wasn't living a very healthy life. And it was at the end of 2001 when basically I started to think I was going insane. I could hear voices in my head. I was looking after my grandfather when I got back from Africa. And at that point, I was like, oh, okay, I need to do something. I've been looking after people all my life. I need help now. And it was at that point, 2001, I was like, right, I need to do something. I think straight after that, I went on a binge, probably a couple of weeks, just drinking drugs around New Year. And at the end of that period, I think it was around the 15th of January 2002, I was like, enough. And I ended up going to visit a retreat center. And this retreat center was 3 weeks, and it was that point I was like, oh my God, I'm a mess. I need something like this long term.
Would it be true to say that everything that's happened since has evolved from that moment? That low point of finding yourself on the binge and realizing you were a mess?
Yeah. I think just, yeah, I think it was accumulation of things. It was like 97. It was like, I loved self-development. It was like really loving. I felt really good the first time I meditated. I think I share that in my book, the story of going across Victoria Station when I'd been meditating a few weeks and just being in the flow and feeling really happy. And it was little things, and then it got to that point where I was like, I couldn't go forward anymore. You know, I was a mess, and I booked in to see a psychiatrist, essentially because I thought I was going crazy. And luckily, I didn't get to see the psychiatrist. I'd left the country at that point. So yes, is the answer. That yeah, at that point it was like, okay, I need to do some work here.
Seems like a familiar story, Piers, that sense of people reach their lowest point and then from then they have a choice to recover or to do the work that's necessary. So we'll get on to that in a little while, no doubt. But if we fast forward to right now, and the book's been published and came out, in fact, yesterday, the 19th of May, what was it that led you to write the book?
So it was 2008. I'd been out of the monastery. So I'd gone to a monastery. So I'd been out of the monastery 2008 for a couple of years. And I just had these teachings going around my head. You know, for 3.5 years, I was in the monastery and I was receiving the teachings from the monks every day. And I just noticed as I was walking along, even when I was there, just these teachings started to come to me. And then I started to write them down. I have a bookshelf back there where I just write books and books and books of notes and things. So it just felt like the natural progression to share my story. And I thought if I can support one person with the story, then so that was kind of what drew me to write. It was like I had it all going around my head, and yeah, I really love writing. So
well, it's a beautiful book, and it's certainly full of the love you have of writing and the information and techniques and tools that you've gathered. And I noticed as I was reading it, you've interwoven your own personal story through the book from beginning to end, and you don't spare us the details. It's right in there, down and dirty.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, how challenging was it to combine these two threads, which I think they go together beautifully? The techniques for bringing yourself back to some healthy, balanced place, and this extraordinary story of what you went through to get to this place. How difficult was it?
Yeah, very challenging. I mean, I started it 2008 and I've gone through 3 revisions, and I've had such resistance to putting it out there that it's now 2020. So
there's 12 years of resistance.
Yeah. So I put it on my website. It's been on my website. People could download it, but very few people have known about it. And therefore, yeah, it was challenging to write, you know, to go through that. And I'm just writing my second book at the moment about my boarding school experiences. And likewise, it's like a lot of tears. But the reason I put the stories in there is to show that if I can get through something like this, then, and these are the tools that I've used, and I feel that then you can too, to say that, you know, if I've had the tragedies or been through the things that I've been through, and I can come out the other side, I'm still a work in progress. I still have to do work on myself. I still have to catch myself and do this work. But that's partly why I wanted to interweave the story, because, you know, I read it again last week, the book, and it was like, oh, God, am I really ready for that to go out there? It's like I've really made some silly mistakes. And I did a men's group a couple of weeks ago, and we were asked the question, you know, what's the thing you regret the most in your life? And I was like, which one?
Sure. Well, I put my hand up to that. I think that's something most men would kind of accept and as the truth for them. So that's great and very clear. But who do you think the market for this book is, Piers? Who's it aimed at? Who's the man or woman, I suppose? Is it aimed at women as well? Who could benefit from it?
Yeah. So I think I started putting videos onto YouTube in 2006. And what's happened over the years is the people who've been drawn to my work has been men. So it's mainly written for men, partly because of my own experiences. And yet I see that those people who've come to my classes or done, I used to do healing in the center of my town, and I used to get women clients. But over the last few years, it's mainly been men. So it's mainly men, aimed at men, but I see that it can relate to women just as much, because these are challenging times. And I didn't write it specifically for men. I just wrote it from my heart, going, I need to just share my story, and these are things that have worked for me.
Yeah, well, I can testify, having read it, that it's absolutely packed with practical techniques. I mean, they're not difficult exercises, they're just practical, simple, straightforward things that people can use to bring themselves back into balance, for want of a better way of putting it. And 11 chapters which are themed the basic structures or foundations, I would say, of emotional healing. So, for instance, we've got exercise and fitness, wealth and money, using spirituality to overcome stress, how to reduce stress, and so it goes on. It's beautifully laid out section by section. And all of these chapters contain exercises and tips. The 101 ways are spread through the 11 chapters. 101 ways is the title of the book, in case anyone's wondering. 101 ways to cultivate resilience, well-being, and inner peace in all areas of your life. So, of course, there are many lessons in this book, and many men reading it will have those aha moments. I'm just wondering, Piers, what stands out for you as the greatest lesson or lessons that life has taught you that you've put into this book?
Yeah, great question. When you sent the questions through last night, I was just reflecting, and I think the biggest shift I had. I mean, if I go into the story a little bit, so 2002 to 2001, I had this realization. 2002, I went to this retreat center. In this retreat center, I met an ex-monk, and I went to him for sessions, and he lent me this book called The Warrior Within. And so he became like this guide for the few weeks I was there, by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. And while I was there working with him, he said, what you probably need is to go and visit a monastery. And so I sent off a letter. Nothing happened. They were on winter retreat. So he says, let me contact another monastery. So he contacted another monastery, and the abbot there said, oh yes, we could do with someone to come and help during our winter retreat. So I spoke to him. The short of it was I went up to visit this monastery. So I think it was February 14th, 2002. The reason I remember is the day before, it was the last time I had a drink of alcohol or smoke, or had drugs. And it was, my sister was leaving to go traveling. So I remember 14th of February, I went up to the monastery, and it was really challenging. And I made a real mess of it for a few years. I mean, a real mess of it. And the biggest insight was, after a couple of years, maybe 18 months, 2 years, I just had this insight about letting go of getting my own way.
Letting go of getting your own way. Mm-hmm.
And when I had that, it was like, I'd been so serious. Monastic life is not easy by any account. If you ever tried, it was no sex, no sexual contact with yourself, no meal after midday, although in summertime it went up to 1 o'clock. What other things were in there? So no lying, no stealing. The only things I really could do was I could eat before midday, I could exercise, I could work, meditate, read, and that was it. There was no internet, no very few things. And I really struggled with that, especially when I took the monastic vows. I was a novice, which meant I wore white robes rather than the orange robes. And I had 8 precepts rather than the 227 precepts that the monks had, and I really struggled with it. It was that control, but it was what I felt when I got to the monastery. It was like I had this safe container around me.
Yeah.
And I know Robert Moore talks about that in one of his talks, saying that in order for us to be initiated, we need three things. We need a ritual elder, and that was the abbot. You need a safe space, that's the monastery. And then you need some form of humiliation. And I shaved my head and my eyebrows. I wore white for 3 years. It was like literally, a humiliation. And it was at the point where I let go of getting my own way that I was like, great. It was just a real wake up. And from that point on, I started to heal. I mean, as you read in the book, the journey was challenging in the monastery.
Very challenging indeed. And I'm fascinated by the concept of initiation in that space. I mean, men listening to this probably will be familiar with initiation from boyhood to manhood, and from young adult to mature adult, and perhaps initiation into elderhood, and the different forms that they take. But what was it you were being initiated into in that monastic setting with those three things: the elder, the safe space, and the humiliation, or the ritual of wearing the robes and shaving the head? What was the initiation about?
So I remember sitting in the monastery one day. So we lived very simply. I had a room, a couple of pads on the floor, and I was just sitting there, and I was like realizing I was 26, 27 at the time. I thought, I'm still a boy.
Ah, I see.
And it's only since I've been through the journey that I've kind of, in listening to talks and doing work with the archetypes, I've realized what happened. But essentially I was a boy, and what the process did, it started to help me to become a man. And I love what Robert Moore talks about in another of his talks. He talks about this, the Grail Cup, that as boys we grow up and we start to sculpt this Grail Cup. And mine, as you know from the story, was very, very cracked. And so I arrived in the monastery with this mess of a cup.
Yes.
And what the process was starting to heal this cup, put it back together. And I was so fragile in the monastery, so fragile. I self-harmed, and I tried to take my own life. It was like trying to, trying to heal these wounds. And I had such great support. I worked with a Jungian analyst while I was there, who got me to write my dreams down every night, and I'd send them to her. And I wrote down hundreds and hundreds of dreams. And then I had the monks and that safe container. So I feel the initiation was for me going from boy to becoming a man.
That's very clear.
In the shamanic traditions I've trained in, they talk about the age from 27 to 30 is called the chaotic journey. And meaning that those things that you've not worked on before, or the wounds, they come up in those periods for you to heal. Now, I went to the monastery 4 months before my 27th birthday, and I left a month before my 30th. And I didn't know anything about this, but I was there for my chaotic journey, and it was the most chaotic thing you could imagine on one level. But it totally restructured my psyche, and it was profound, hellish.
Everything.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking, as we talk, we might be scaring some of the listeners who know they have a need for some recovery work of some kind, or to heal their emotional wounds. They might be getting a bit scared in thinking they have to go off to a monastery for 3 years to kind of undergo those experiences. So let's bring it back to, the men who are listening to this and who know that they need to do something. What do you think they can do most practically to heal, and what part in that healing will your book play?
Okay, so for me, I don't think people need to go through what I went through. My experiences were pretty traumatic growing up, and therefore I feel that one is like the things I've realized now is that it doesn't need to be as painful as that. There needs to be a commitment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so what I teach my clients, the people I work one-on-one with, is to have a daily practice. So you commit to doing the work, but you have a daily practice, and it might be 30 minutes a day, morning and evening, and that's what I get my clients to commit to, is to do that. And there's lots of exercises in the book, and it's, you know, putting the meditation in there, the breath work, the yoga, the qigong. You put that into your 30 minutes, and I feel that starts to, you know, bring shape to our Grail Cup by doing the practice. The other thing that I found is, you know, some form of shadow work or energy psychology. So I've trained in EFT and matrix re-imprinting, and I met, when I was doing my training in matrix re-imprinting, a Jungian analyst, and I told him of my journey. I spent 4 years in total with 2 different Jungian analysts, and I tried counseling, and that didn't work for me. So I found the Jungian analysis really great. That was my shift as I started to look at my unconscious. And I was speaking to this Jungian analyst on this workshop, and he says, oh, I've given up my Jungian analysis work because I found that matrix re-imprinting works so much quicker. And I found that, yeah, if someone's watching this and it's like, oh yeah, what do I do? It's like, there are tools now, things like Psych K, matrix re-imprinting, EFT, these other paradigms, shadow work that you can do, that you can go within and heal. And it doesn't have to be like myself. I mean, the abbot said to me at one point, he said, well, what you've been through in 2-3 years would have taken you 10 years in therapy, or 20 years in therapy. I think he said 10 years. And so, yeah,
Yes,
you know,
exactly. And I think that's fantastic to keep in mind, that there are different ways of healing and there are different approaches, and not the same approach will suit everybody. But in this book, we've got a whole variety of techniques and exercises. As you mentioned a few of them a minute ago. Some, just looking down the list here, of course, people will recognize: gratitude practice, exercise for compassion, speaking mindfully. These are practical things that people can do. These are not deep diving, long-term psychotherapeutic, analytical exercises. They're practical tools that move people forward. And as I look down that list, Piers, I'm just wondering if there's a favorite exercise or exercises for you in the book. There's 44 altogether throughout the book. So it's a lot to choose from. Do you have a favorite?
I do, yeah. So for me, it's laughter.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
See,
yeah.
I'm starting already. It's infectious.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably, I was very serious. That was part of my wounding. It was like to be very serious and, you know, city worker. And I remember it was about 2008, 2009. And I'd been teaching stress management with executives and things like that. And I just had not a very good business deal, or it didn't turn out very well. And I was a bit stressed about it. So I thought, oh, what do I do? So I just came across laughter yoga. So I thought, oh, I try it. And I found that's just brilliant. If I'm thinking or worrying, I just need to laugh for a couple of minutes. And it's a practice I do every day still. I'll do my exercise, I'll do my yoga, and then I lie doing savasana on the mat. And then I listen to a little guided laughter meditation, and then I just and it's like this joyfulness. It's like, if you look at, for me, real benevolent king energy, like the Dalai Lama, you look at, for me, I look at Nelson Mandela or some of these other monks, they're all laughing, they're all smiling. And as you mentioned in the interview we did 4 weeks ago, about the king being in joy.
Yes, absolutely. That's right.
And so that is my favorite, just because it's very simple. It seems to just switch off the neocortex, the thinking mind. So even if I'm worrying about something, it's like, and yeah, so that's my favorite exercise in that.
Right, fantastic. I remember saying something like, one of the qualities of the king is the fact that he knows everything is all right. Even if it's shit, it's still all right. And there's an acceptance of what is, and in that joyous place, you can see how that can be. It's like, yeah, just it's all right. Let's just accept what is, and then let's do something to change this if it needs to be changed. So it's not a kind of passive acceptance. It's a place, I think, of looking forward. And the joy and the laughter exercise, I think, is perfect. It's one of the shortcuts to stepping into sovereignty, I think.
Yeah.
There's that beautiful feedback loop was it Paul Ekman, am I right in the name there? Discovered that actually it's not a one-way traffic in emotions. They make your face look miserable if you're sad, but if you pull your sad face, you feel miserable. It goes both ways. So with joy, bingo. If you want to feel joyous, just laugh.
Yeah, and I think it was Paul Ekman said as well in one of his research that if I laugh, it stimulates and prepares your brain for laughter as well.
Yeah.
And so
exactly.
when we bring that laughter to a group, then that affects other people, and they kind of, if you do it long enough, then
they'll join in or leave, I guess. Fantastic. So there's a couple of things that really struck me through the book, Piers. I mean, compassion and gratitude. I mean, there's many other themes running all the way through the text, but compassion and gratitude stand out. And I think compassion is about compassion for self, and gratitude is gratitude for what is and what you have. But maybe you could expand on that and give us your perspective on those two qualities or attributes.
So yeah, compassion. In Buddhism, there's called the four Brahma Viharas, which essentially are metta, loving kindness, compassion, karuna, mudita, which is sympathetic joy, and upekkha, which is equanimity. So they're considered the four jewels. I can't remember exactly what the Brahma Viharas means, and yet compassion for me, I see it as a central teaching in my own life, is that I was really hard on myself, and I just noticed, I think the Buddha used this analogy, and I guess he used it more for anger, but saying when you're angry, it's like you're holding this hot rock and you don't realize that it's burning you. It's only when you put the hot rock down do you realize, actually that's the relief of not holding this hot rock. And I see that part of the way for me of letting go of that hot rock is like through compassion, is seeing, for example, another person hurts. I mean, some of the monks in the monastery had been through equal challenges that I had been through, if not more severe, and therefore sometimes we would clash. And the abbot used to tell me and help me to see compassion, have compassion for this person, rather than get angry at them. And I just found that, really key. And it was not just compassion for others, it was having compassion for myself, that actually I've been through quite a lot here. And it was that process of grieving. I mean, in the interview again, you said 4 weeks ago about the importance of grieving. And I literally cried every day for at least 2 years, heavily grieving, just tears upon tears. I'd wait during my, and this is from not crying at all for 15 years to suddenly crying every day. And that for me, it was like this reservoir just flowing out. And part of it was, the grief and starting to have compassion for myself, love for myself again. Really hated myself, age 26, 27.
Oh gosh, yes.
Because that's what I'd been taught to do. There must be something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And so it was beginning, and the abbot used to say to me, receive yourself as you are, Piers. And it was like, so now it's like I couldn't cry before. Now I can cry like that. And most days I still cry, but it's part of my practice. I do laughter, and then I might do a bit of crying, and then I feel a lot freer.
Yeah,
So that for me is the compassion is like, I see it as really key.
Absolutely. Self-compassion in particular, that ability to, well, somehow silence the inner critic is part of that, having compassion for self. I don't think you can be compassionate when you have an inner critic that's beating down on you. And I do recall you mentioned that in the book. I noticed, by the way, we've completely left the question sheet behind. And
Oh, that's fine. No worries.
So that inner critic fascinated me because, I've got a way of, when my inner critic pipes up, of kind of negotiating with him or talking to him, which usually is what he's after anyway. But in the book, you describe this, I think, as an NLP technique of changing his shape and form. Do you want to just mention that? Because I'm sure, as we know, everyone has an inner critic.
Yeah. So
greater or lesser ferocity. Yeah.
So I believe this is because there's quite a few techniques. I believe the technique you're referring to is if you notice you've got this voice in your head. So we could just run through this now. Imagine you've got this voice who's criticizing you. Notice where it is in your head, and then just putting it in front of you. It might be a meter in front of you, and then just moving it off again and again, get it to repeat the criticism. One of mine when I worked corporately was, I've got too much work on, or, I can't cope. So you put that voice off in front of you. And then it's to start to change it. So it's either to turn the volume down or to give it like Donald Duck voice. Or I can't think of another character.
Mickey Mouse springs to mind immediately.
Mickey Mouse.
Me. Yes.
Yeah, so Mickey Mouse. And then just putting it off in the distance. So it's like we're meeting that part of ourselves. And that just, for me, it takes the edge off. That the inner critic, and I think, so that's.
Well, I as you were saying that, I had an image of Mickey Mouse appearing form of my inner critic. He's never looked like that before, so it's hard to take that seriously as an inner critic. It's like, okay, thank you. And I see what you mean about taking the edge off it. It changes the tonality and the energy and the sense of it completely.
Yeah.
Now, of course, these are simple techniques, but they work. No matter how crazy that might sound to somebody, the fact is it works, as do all the others in the book. But what comes up for me as I say that, and you're nodding, how can somebody who's reading this book and they've got these exercises find the discipline, if you like to use the word discipline, or the rigor of doing them every day, which is what's actually required, I believe?
Yeah. So thank you. That's a great question. And for me, one of the keys is having just a morning routine. So some people believe it begins in the morning, but for me, it also begins in the evening. It's like when we get to bed early, when we get to bed, say 10, 11 o'clock, and we then set our alarm. So if we usually get up at 7 o'clock, we set our alarm for 6:30, or in my case, I do, this is just me because I'm passionate about it and because I teach others. I do between 3 to 4 hours of practice a day in the morning. So I get up at 6 and I will, do my practice. And what I find is that one is if you make that intention, I'm getting up in the morning, in the night beforehand. So you just see, and you do everything you can that you're going to sleep well. Then in the morning, when you get up, you're kind of more ready to go. And it's like having, for me, this discipline. So I think for men, this is one of the things I do. So I have a calendar, and on this calendar, I will write down my practices. So, I annotate them. So I've got Taoist practices, matrix reimprinting, meditation, pranayama. I do high intensity stretching. So I write these things down, and it's like it's holding myself accountable to doing those. Sometimes I don't feel like it, and yet I'll still do it.
Exactly. So that's the warrior's discipline, isn't it? Which is
the key
to kind of getting things done.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's kind of coming back to that king energy, that what is my goal, or where do I want to go with this? Maybe it's I want to learn something new. So I've started in the last few months spending 30 minutes to an hour of my practice studying. And it's like, so it's keeping that, so we have the discipline of the warrior, but me coming back up to the king of what's my goal.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to get fitter, or I want to feel less stressed. So we have that clarity, and then we can design our morning routine from that.
Excellent. And so, of course, all of this is set out in the book, isn't it? So this is actually a complete manual. It's not just giving people a list of 44 exercises and 101 ways. It's actually a practical manual.
Yeah, yeah.
This is what you can do, and this is how you do it, and this is how long it will take, and this is your choice. And as I looked down there, I just caught sight of the word gratitude. So perhaps you'd like to give us your perspective on gratitude, because I think in a way this has become one of the hackneyed and perhaps searching for the word, less respected things that people put out there, your gratitude practice. So I know you have a different perspective on it, and I think it'd be nice to hear that.
Thank you, Rod. So I just invite people listening to this now, is just to stop and breathe. Just place your hand over your heart, and I prefer the center of the heart, the chest, and I just invite you to just breathe in through the nose, out through the nose, relaxing your shoulders. In through the nose and out through the nose. And final time, in through the nose and out through the nose. So you can either keep your eyes closed, but this is for me the thing between gratitude that a lot of people practice. It's kind of more cerebral. I feel it needs to come down to the heart, going from duality, good and bad, right and wrong, down into the heart, which is more unity. And when we're in that feeling space, it comes from the Heart Math Institute, the quick coherence technique, where you just imagine you're breathing in and out through the heart, feeling your hand over your chest, in and out through the heart. And from that space, we then connect to what we're grateful for. And there's different ways of doing this. For me, what I like to do is, I'll do this as a practice before I go to bed. So before I go to sleep, I'll do my meditation, and as I'm lying down, drifting off, I'll just go into that beautiful space of gratitude. And it's, you can do it general. So they talk about going general, so that the sun came up today, that I have water to drink. It's like, these huge things that if they weren't there, then our lives would be so different. Imagine if it was now dark outside. Imagine if, we have 206, I always get this wrong, 206 or 208 bones in our body. Imagine if one was broken, but, even if one was, you've still got 207 which are okay, but we focus on that one which is not working.
Very true, very true.
And so for me, that's the practice of gratitude, is like to feel it in our hearts, to feel, to feel the body, to feel that joy. And it's like, yeah. And if it becomes rote, then, sometimes you can write it down in your journal, but then go back over it and then feel it. Don't just write it. Just say, I've had a good day today. Then go back and go, feel it, look up. When we go down, our eyes go down, we get more going into our feelings, emotions. When we look up, and we open the body up, it's like, yeah, I can move into a different space, a different feeling.
Excellent, thank you.
Pleasure.
And as I said a few minutes ago, the book's divided into 11 chapters, and there's a different topic in each chapter, but one that's going to be very relevant to a lot of our listeners is finances, wealth, money, abundance. And you talk about this there's some fantastic exercises in the book to create abundance. And again, you know, if I was thinking about some of the books I've read over the years on abundance and some of the practices that I've heard recommended, it's quite possible that people listening to this could be a little bit cynical, but I was really struck by how different the practices in this book are. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, for me, abundance, you know, I think the word wealth comes from the root well-being. So when we say wealth, it's not just about financial wealth. And I think that's really good about the COVID-19, the lockdown. We're seeing what we do have.
Yes.
We're appreciating the weather. We're appreciating nature. We're appreciating our families, walking, things like that. So it's realizing, first of all, abundance is kind of this well-being. That for me is important. And I see that, you know, yeah, one of the things I noticed is when someone says to you, you know, would you like $1 million or £1 million? I say, yes. And then you give someone a compliment, you say, you're beautiful. And you say, no, I'm not. He says, well, if you can't receive a compliment, how do you receive the gifts? And often,
great point.
Often people give us these gifts and we don't receive them. And therefore it's learning to receive more, to give. Yes, I think that's very much the king, the warrior, you know, the masculine giving, but we must receive as well. And abundance is our way of receiving. So yeah, I feel, you know, when I worked in London, I earned quite a lot of money, and I lived near Hampstead Heath, quite an exclusive area, had a lovely flat, and yet I wasn't wealthy, you know, because it was an internal work. It was realizing that it was about joy. And several of my teachers have said that, you know, let's talk about the purpose of life is about happiness, is about joy.
I'll buy that.
And we often forget that. And we think it's about getting the latest car or getting the latest house. And yeah, it's remembering the feeling beneath that how would that feel to have those things? And so, yeah, I'm glad you found those exercises. And I'll be honest, I don't remember all of them off the top of my head.
I'm not surprised to hear it, but one of the beautiful themes that runs through them all, I think, is this concept of opening to receive, and then, of course, receiving in a way that represents or reflects, rather, your own sense of self-worth. And we talk about financial worth and self-worth. To me, those two things are directly correlated. Nobody's going to become abundant if they have a low self-worth. At some level, they have to love themselves and believe that they're worthy of receiving abundance. So these exercises focus, to my mind, on that aspect of it, rather than just sit down and visualize your nice, beautiful house in the countryside and ignore the voice in the back of your mind that's saying something negative about the whole thing. So I think it's a great take on prosperity and abundance. Great take on gratitude, compassion, so many more here that we could talk about. I was just kind of struck there as I looked at the chapter titles, mindful speaking. Tell us a little bit about mindful speaking, would you, Piers?
Okay, so that's one of the precepts. So I had 8 precepts in the monastery, and one of them was mindful speech. So mindful speaking, I found that I used to worry quite a lot when I lived in the city, when I traveled, because I wasn't very skillful. I'd steal, I would lie, and you know, it's like it was a done thing in the office. I'm just going to take these pens, I'm just going to go to the pub, I'm just going to steal this glass or this picture, because it's like, oh, and therefore I had this worry. And I found one of the things was about speaking, just to be really mindful about what I was saying. I remember the abbot said to me one time, he says, if you can't not say it, don't say it. Because there's that urge sometimes that we go, especially in lockdown at the moment, or around this time, that we feel we've got to tell our partners, and you can feel that irritation. And for me, that's the time that we breathe, we take ourselves off, we deal with our stuff, and then we can speak more mindfully. I remember a story from one of the monks saying that he knew he had to tell something to someone, but he knew it wasn't the right timing, so he sat with it. He sat with it for about 14 years.
Yes, I recall reading that. It did strike me at the time as an extraordinary story about finding the right moment, but there you go. There's courage in that, I think, in just wait and hold it. Are you sovereign enough to hold this rather than blurt it out and cause your kingdom to crack and maybe even fall apart? Yeah. So I'd just like to run through a few of the other exercises, just so that people can perhaps get an overall picture of what we're talking about here. So we've mentioned the yoga in passing, and the exercise includes all kinds of beautiful techniques for enjoyable exercise, choosing one that people like. Gratitude we've mentioned, abundance we've mentioned, giving and receiving, finding out what you're interested in, both spiritually and practically. An exercise for compassion, learning to receive yourself as you are, taking charge of your work, feeling your body. I'd like to come back to that one in a moment, around the question of trauma. Power, relaxation, recharge. I love that one. That was just fabulous. Just like, whoa! Dealing with the inner critic, finding your passion, stepping into your fear. And the laughter one we've mentioned. Whole body relaxation technique. Fantastic. And just to make the point again, how to be patient with your loved ones, seeing the reflection of you and your partner, learning communication from others, healing relationships, decluttering, and so on. But just to make the point again, doesn't mean you have to do all 44 every day. You're choosing what suits you best for the areas that will be most important and relevant to you.
Yeah, yes, definitely. It's like,
absolutely. Yeah. So, with that said, what would you say to somebody in crisis right now, somebody who needs instant help?
Okay. So, I mean, I will just share, for me, my monastic experience was, as I've shared before, messy. And there's many things I did, but if I was to reflect 3 really important things, first thing was the exercise. Really, when I used to struggle, and I would just put my boots on and I'd go out for a walk. That would be the first thing. We were able to do that. So it's like, go outside, and I think there's research by Irving Kirsch at the University of Hull, who's just saying that antidepressants and exercise have a similar benefit in helping with depression, but the relapse rate, I can't remember the exact figures, but something like only 8% relapse with exercise and something like 30% relapse with antidepressants. And so it's like, okay. So for me, exercise, that was the thing that I did every day. I'd walk. The second thing I would suggest is breath. And Emma Seppala talks about it in her book, The Happiness Track, a Stanford professor. And she's basically saying that it's very difficult for us to talk our way out of stress, to try and breathe. We can breathe our way out of stress. So a very simple one is the box breath. You breathe in for 4, you hold your breath for 4, you breathe out for 4, and you hold your breath for 4. And I realized that I've frozen.
Okay, are you back? No audio, Piers, you're muted. That's it. Okay, the box breath.
The box breath. So it was just breathing in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, and then hold for 4. So just something simple like that, counting it on your fingers. 1, 2, and if you're walking, you can do that as you're walking. Steps 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold your breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that, if you do that for a little while, that will start to help you.
But certainly, I tried that when I was reading the book, and it certainly changed my state. It's just simple and effective. So exercise, breath, and
third thing is community for me. So I had, I know it's hard at the moment with the lockdown, and yet there's groups like, where we met, the Mankind Project. There's lots of other men's groups, women's groups, mixed groups, which are meeting online. The Mankind Project are meeting every week. This is, I've got a group that I meet every 2 weeks on a Thursday night, which is an open group for men. It's like there are these spaces where we can get that community. It might be you have a friend that you call. That someone you can reach out to. And so for me, that's the third thing. I had the support of the monks. The abbot said to me, he said, anytime you've got a problem, Piers, come and knock on my door. I'm here for you. Yeah. And often, first 6 months, I didn't take him up on that. And I had to learn to receive.
Of course, that's the beautiful concept, learning to receive. Yeah. So thank you. So one thing I'd like to cover that I mentioned a moment ago is trauma stored in the body and how people can deal with that, because we're more and more, I think, coming to understand this is not just a mental thing, but the effect of wounding in childhood and adolescence, and of course, adulthood as well, can be trauma that's stored in the body. So if anybody's in that situation, what would you recommend?
Yeah, so I mean, what I found myself is to do, practice like matrix reimprinting, EFT, something like that you're dealing with those early traumas. So as I share in my book, I had some traumatic things happen, and I can now go back to those memories, and they're not weighty. They don't bother me at all now. And that's through the work I've done with the EFT and doing that with the matrix reimprinting. So it's like taking the charge out. Otherwise, it's like we're carrying these rocks, and it's like, why can't I find joy in my life? It's because we've got all of this, I think you call it the shadow bag, or, you've got this bag that we're holding. And therefore, part of the work for me is going in and either working with a therapist, or, I do my own work personally, but then I also have a therapist I work with, and I find that just helps me to go through my stuff as it comes up. So there's Jungian analysis, there's the work that you do, Rod, the shadow work. For me there's lots of things that for dealing with trauma now, whereas before it was like, well, that's me, I can't change, there's no hope for me. It's like, no, if you read my story and you see that, wow, where I went from to how I am now, it's like it's a very different place because of that process of dealing with the unconscious.
Yeah, very much so. Yes. Well, final question for you, Piers. There's shelves and shelves of books on how to live a healthier, happier, better, more wealthy, more productive, more fulfilled, more purposeful life. So let's hear straight from you, speaking directly, mindfully, about why this book, why not one of the others?
Follow your heart.
Tell me more.
So it's like, don't believe me, go with your heart. If you're drawn to reading this, if you're drawn to my story, and you're like, oh, yeah, then I'd say read it. If you're not drawn to it, then don't. I think so often we say, read this, do that. It's like, come back to your own wisdom, come back to your own sense of knowing. And I feel we're being told in this world that we don't have this power, and yet we do. We're so powerful.
Definitely.
and we have this intuition, we have this knowing, and you know, my book is maybe different on one level, is that there's a lot of story, but there's a lot of the techniques, and they're not techniques I've just come up with. They're either techniques that I've used, and most of them are the ones that I use to help me get through my own trauma and my own struggles. So, but yeah, I'd say just follow your heart.
It's a very practical book. It's not the story of your life that interweaves through it, and the exercises and the 101 ways to cultivate resilience, well-being and inner peace are very practical. I think for me that's something that would really appeal to men. Is action steps that can be taken. You know, this is the warrior's mission, to serve the king. Go out and get something done. Well, in this book there are plenty of choices that will work well for men who want to heal, and not just heal from the past, but let's remember the title of the book, How to Survive and Thrive in Challenging Times. It's exactly a case of it does what it says on the cover. Ways to survive, how to survive and thrive in challenging times. So thank you, Piers. It's fascinating. We could talk for much longer, but you know, as always, we could talk for much longer. But I think that will have given at least some of the listeners a flavour of your book, which I highly recommend. So would you like to tell us how they can get hold of it, and perhaps also a little bit more about the work that you're doing, and perhaps any future projects that you've got in mind?
Okay, thank you, Rod. So yeah, my book is available on Amazon, certainly US, UK. It is available in Europe as well, and I think through to Japan. It is, so yes, that's available for people to buy. The Kindle version will be up in the next week. Just working on that at the moment. How to work with me is the work I do partly is one-to-one coaching, that I work with people, and I work on a coaching level and a therapeutic. I work two levels really: the conscious, so working out practice, tools, and then the unconscious, going into those areas where we're stuck, the traumas, and just letting them go. So we're not carrying that baggage forward. And you can find out more about me at piers-cross.com, and I'll put a link in the description as well. And your final question was about future projects. Is I've realized that I love writing, I love creating. And so I have nearly finished my second book, which is about my boarding school experiences. I have a third book, which I'm about halfway through, which is a fiction book, it's called The Happiness Quest. And it's about very similar to my story in London, about a man there. And then my next book, after that, my fourth book's about relationships. So I have lots of projects.
Great. Well, I shall look forward to talking with you about the boarding school book, because that's a subject of such importance for so many people. Men and women alike, as it happens, in my experience. Just as many women wounded by that experience as were men. Fewer in absolute terms, of course, because fewer women went to boarding school, but the damage is just as profound. So that's going to be an interesting conversation. So in the meantime, thank you. It's been an absolute delight talking with you. And like I said, I recommend the book simply because it's a practical, usable, straightforward manual of tools and techniques that people can pick up and use right now to make themselves feel better, let alone heal the wounds of the past. So it's of its time, isn't it? Its title tells us that. How to Survive and Thrive in Challenging Times. Did you have that in mind before COVID-19? Or?
Well, I'll be honest, I wrote it, when I first wrote it, it was called The Wellbeing Way.
Oh, yes.
But then I about 2 months ago, I gave it to a client and I said, what do you think? And he says, it's brilliant, but call it How to Survive and Thrive in Challenging Times, because it is that.
It is.
And I'm like, oh, okay. And so that's how,
they say, is history. Good.
So,
Well, thank you again, Piers, and we'll see you next time on the podcast.
okay. Thank you very much, Rod. Okay. Take care.
Pleasure. Bye for now.